Hazel Voss had been standing in the doorway of the service bay for almost 2 minutes before she finally said what she had come to say. She told Owen Calloway her father wanted to meet him, not as the mechanic who had quietly kept the Voss construction fleet running for 3 years without a single missed deadline, as the man she trusted with things she did not say out loud. Owen looked at her for a long moment. He did not smile. He did not look away from the engine he had been working on. He set down his wrench with the careful deliberateness of someone making a decision about what came next. Then he said quietly that he had already met Leonard Voss, that the day he had met him was the day everything he had built with his hands had come apart. He looked at her. He said nothing more. Can love survive when the woman standing in your doorway turns out to be the daughter of the man who cost you everything you were? The service bay at Calloway Mechanical on Renfrew Street smelled of oil and cold concrete, the way it always did in March in Edmonton, when the ground was still hard and the light came in low through the high windows and made the dust particles visible. Hazel had not moved since Owen turned back to the engine. She had come prepared for a dozen versions of this conversation. She had not prepared for the one she got. There was no bitterness in his voice. That was what she kept returning to, standing alone in the doorway after the sound of his boots disappeared into the back of the shop. No performance of old grievance. No strategic deployment of pain to make her feel something useful to him. Just the flat, weight-bearing fact of a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had finally set it in a room where it could not be ignored. Hazel had not known. That certainty sat in her chest with a particular discomfort, the kind that comes from understanding that a whole history had existed beneath everything she thought she understood, and that it had been there all along, below the surface the way damage is, invisible until you press on exactly the right place. She walked out through the bay door into the cold air. The question Owen had left her pressed against the inside of her ribs the entire drive home. When had he met her father? What had Leonard Voss done? Why had Owen never said a word? And what, exactly, had she been walking them both toward without knowing any of it? The house on Belgravia Road was 980 square feet, and Owen had learned to make it work the way he made most things work, through patience and the refusal to treat any problem as too large for a methodical approach. His daughter Isla had started grade 1 the autumn after they moved in. He had packed her backpack the night before her first day and sat at the kitchen table at 10:30, checking it twice. Not because he had forgotten anything, because it was the kind of thing that deserved doing twice. His mornings ran on a schedule that left no room for drift. Up at 6, Isla's lunch made before she was awake. He had learned early that she would not eat anything she could smell before she was fully conscious, so the peanut butter went in last, sealed tight. By 7:15, he had walked her to the corner of Belgravia and 76th Avenue and watched her go, backpack bouncing, until she rounded the corner and was gone. He had been a licensed journeyman mechanic when he was 23 and had worked his way into a lead diagnostics role at a mid-sized fleet contractor by 28. He understood engines the way some people understood language, intuitively, below the level of conscious thought, so that the problem revealed itself to him before he had finished listening for it. He was not the kind of man who took shortcuts because he understood, better than most, what shortcuts eventually cost. After Isla was in bed, he worked at the kitchen table doing contract assessments for a small transport company that paid him by the report. The work kept his mind from going to the places it still went sometimes when the house was too quiet. It also meant that Isla's school clothes were not a negotiation. He did not date. It was not a rule so much as an understanding he had reached with himself. After Renata, after everything that came after, the particular kind of sustained attention that another person required was something he could not maintain while also being the only one Isla counted on. He had placed that part of himself in a room and closed the door and not looked for the key. In his wallet, behind his driver's license, he kept a photograph taken outside the Royal Alexandra on a Saturday morning in November 8 years ago. Renata was looking at the camera. He was looking at her. On the back, in his own handwriting, a date. He did not take it out often. He had never let himself throw it away. Hazel Voss had understood from the age of 13 that being Leonard Voss's daughter was not a straightforward thing. It had weight to it, the kind of weight that operates the way heavy wool does, warm from a distance, suffocating if you stop moving. She had learned to carry it without letting it show, which was perhaps why people who did not know her well often mistook her composure for coldness. She had taken the operations director role at Voss Construction 2 years ago, after completing her MBA in Vancouver and spending 4 years at an independent logistics firm, a deliberate detour her father had tolerated but not endorsed. He had wanted her in the company from the day she graduated. She had wanted to know who she was without the Voss name doing half the work. She was not inexperienced with men. She had been engaged once, briefly, to someone her father had approved of with an enthusiasm that should have told her something. It ended when she found an email on his laptop at a weekend in Jasper, not a dramatic email, just a confirming one. She had returned the ring in an envelope without annotation and driven home alone. The Whitemood industrial contract had been 6 months into its execution phase when she first noticed the discrepancy. One of the fleet vehicles had been flagged by Owen after a routine inspection. Not just for the obvious mechanical issue, but for a secondary hydraulic fault that the contracted service company had signed off as resolved the previous quarter. Owen had written it up in a clear, detailed report with the relevant service records attached, and left it on her desk without a covering note. No name. She had asked around and been told it was the mechanic from the Renfrew Street shop who had been handling overflow diagnostics for 3 years. She went to thank him in person the following Monday. He said, with the ease of someone to whom recognition was genuinely irrelevant, that he was glad it had been caught before anyone needed to find out the harder way. What stayed with her was not that he had found the fault. It was that he had found it and then simply gone back to work. No positioning, no follow-up, no use of it. In the world Hazel moved through, that kind of disinterest in leverage read almost like a language she had stopped expecting to hear. That was when she began paying attention. 8 years before, Owen Calloway had been a different man only in circumstance, not in the things that made him who he was. He had been 29 years old, 14 months into a diagnostic supervisor role at Voss Construction's Fleet Maintenance Division, and already known internally as someone who flagged things other people found inconvenient. He and Renata had been married 11 months. She was 7 weeks pregnant when he found out, and on the evening she told him he had stood in the kitchen of their apartment on 99th Street for a full 30 seconds before reaching for her, and she had laughed at the look on his face, and that was the last uncomplicated evening he could name from memory. The Northgate Depot project was the largest the division had taken on in years. Sometime in the procurement phase, a cost reduction decision had been made above Owen's level, a substitution of the primary hydraulic components in the heavy equipment fleet, with an off-brand equivalent that technically cleared a threshold but, when Owen ran his own numbers, created a failure probability under sustained load conditions that he was not comfortable with. He wrote it up. He submitted it through the correct channels. He received an acknowledgement that it had been received and was under review. 3 weeks passed. He submitted again. The second submission was returned with a note indicating that the decision had been finalized at the senior procurement level and that his concerns had been noted. The third time, he went directly up the chain. The meeting that followed included Leonard Voss. Owen laid out the findings. He had not come to the meeting to perform alarm. He had come with documentation, failure rates from comparable components under similar load conditions, 2 specific references from industry incident reports, and a recommendation for a third-party assessment before the equipment went into active rotation. Leonard listened. He asked 2 questions, both of which were about schedule. Then he said, with the calm of a man who had been deciding things for a long time and had stopped finding it difficult, that the procurement decision had been made at a level that was not being revisited, that the timeline did not accommodate a new assessment process, and that what was needed from Owen that afternoon was his signature on the equipment clearance documentation. Owen said he could not sign it. The room did not erupt. It simply became very still in the way rooms become still when something has been said that everyone in them understands cannot be walked back. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He had put it on silent before the meeting, but had set Renata as an override. He looked at the screen under the table. She had called twice. He stepped out. Her voice on the phone was steady in the way he recognized, the way she got when she needed to keep herself together because someone else needed her not to fall apart. She was at the Misericordia. They had found something at the scan. It needed to be addressed now. She needed him there. He went back into the room and asked to be excused. Leonard Voss told him the meeting had not concluded, that the clearance documentation was still on the table, that his presence was required to resolve it. Owen picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He looked at the project lead. He said, evenly, without raising his voice, that his wife was at the hospital and he was leaving. He was terminated 5 days later for breach of contract and failure to fulfill supervisory responsibilities. No severance. Benefits ended at the close of the month. The complication that had brought Renata to the Misericordia that afternoon was manageable under normal conditions. What Owen now faced, no income, no benefits, a pregnant wife who needed sustained specialist monitoring, was not a set of normal conditions. The pregnancy did not survive. Renata did not recover easily from the loss, or from the financial weight of the months that followed, or from the particular compound grief of both arriving at once. She held on through the winter and into the following spring. She died in June, on a Thursday, with the window open because she had asked him to leave it open the night before, and he had, and the smell of the spruce trees outside came in with the morning air. 2 years later, Owen's sister and her husband were killed on the Yellowhead Highway east of Edson in a November whiteout. Their daughter was 3 years old. Her name was Isla. There were no other relatives in a position to take her in, without it being, for them, a burden they would carry with difficulty. Owen had driven to his sister's house in Spruce Grove alone, packed what Isla needed, and brought her home. He had painted the second bedroom a soft green because it was the color of the blanket she carried everywhere. On the first morning, he made her oatmeal with blueberries, because his sister had told him years before that it was the one breakfast Isla would always eat. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and said, gently, that she was going to live with him now, that he was going to be her dad, and that he knew that was a big thing, and that they would figure it out together. Isla had looked at him for a moment, then picked up her spoon. They figured it out. Some nights he stood at the door of her room and watched her sleep. In those moments, he understood the word enough in a way that he had not before. She was enough. She was what kept the floor solid under him every morning when he woke up. What he had never said aloud was that the name Leonard Voss occupied a specific sealed corridor in his memory. He did not carry it with fire. He was too tired for fire. But he understood, with the cold clarity of a man who reads machines for a living, that a decision made in that boardroom had redirected a load onto the bones of his family that the bones of his family had not been designed to bear. He had done the calculation many times. The result was always the same. The first time Hazel met Isla was not planned. Hazel had stopped by the Renfrew Street shop on a Wednesday afternoon to drop off updated fleet documentation and found Owen at the front desk with a small girl in a red raincoat who was reading a book about deep-sea fish with the focused attention of someone conducting research. Hazel crouched immediately, without thinking, to the girl's level. Isla looked up and asked, with the directness of a child who had not yet learned to soften questions, whether she was the lady who worked at the big building her dad sometimes called about work things. Owen said her name quietly. Isla seemed to understand and returned to her book. But Hazel had caught the half-second before Owen's expression rearranged itself, and what she caught in it was not embarrassment. It was something more careful than that. After that, things shifted in the gradual way they shift when neither person is ready to name what is moving, but both of them are making space for it anyway. Hazel began appearing at job sites that did not strictly require her presence. She learned that Isla was in grade 2 and had recently decided that she wanted to be a marine biologist, which Owen had taken seriously in the way he took Isla's decision seriously and had signed her up for a weekend program at the Telus World of Science. She brought soup to the shop one afternoon in February when the school had called Owen about a fever. She sat with Isla on the waiting room bench reading aloud from a library book about bioluminescent jellyfish, doing different voices for the jellyfish and the anglerfish, until Isla fell asleep against her shoulder with the book still open on her lap. One evening in October, at a small restaurant on White Avenue, where Isla had eaten most of her grilled cheese before turning to Hazel, with the unhesitating candor of a child who has not yet learned to disguise a question as something else, she asked whether Hazel liked her dad. Owen looked at his water glass. Hazel said that she thought Isla's dad was one of the most honest people she had ever met. Isla considered this with the gravity it deserved and went back to her grilled cheese. On the walk back to the car, Hazel thought about her father. Leonard had asked about Owen twice, in the measured way he asked about things he was cataloging for later. She had read it as approval. She told herself it was a good sign. She told herself that her father, complicated as he was, would recognize what was real when he saw it. And so she had walked into the service bay the following morning with her gathered resolve and told Owen that her father wanted to meet him. And Owen had told her that the day he met Leonard Voss was the day everything he loved had begun to come apart. She asked him to say it again. Not because she had not heard it, because she needed it to exist twice before she could begin to hold it. He said it again, in the same register, not cold, not heated, flat in the way that facts are flat when they have been lived with long enough to stop requiring decoration. He said, "I know your father. I worked for his company. I know the kind of decisions he makes and what he considers acceptable collateral when a schedule is at risk. I am not telling you this to make you feel guilty for something you didn't do. I'm telling you because when you said his name in that doorway, I could not stand here and pretend there was nothing in my chest about it." She asked the question she already understood the shape of the answer to. Why had he never said anything? "Because I did not come near you because of that," he said. "I kept my distance from the beginning for the same reason. I tried to keep this professional and I kept trying, and then at some point with Isla there, at the bench reading her book, I stopped being able to." She stood there absorbing this. He was telling her that he had known all along who she was, that the careful space he had maintained had not been disinterest, that it had been something that looked, when she examined it, like a form of protection, of himself, of Isla, possibly of her. That was the thing that got through her defenses more than anything else he had said. He had flagged the fault. He had done the work. He had kept every boundary exactly where he had placed it. And the whole time he had been carrying this alone, without using it. She drove home and called her father's former executive assistant, a woman named Brenda, who had been with Voss Construction for 18 years before retiring to Kelowna 4 years ago. Brenda remembered the Northgate project. She remembered the meeting. She remembered the name Owen Calloway. She spoke with the careful, slightly distant tone of someone who had revisited those events more than once in private and had not arrived anywhere comfortable. After the call, Hazel opened the company's archived HR records, which she had access to as operations director. It took her 2 hours and one conversation with a former compliance manager to assemble what she needed. She sat at her kitchen table until past 1 in the morning with the files spread around her, and a mug of tea she had forgotten was there. What she felt was not simple. It was layered in the specific way of things that involve both love and complicity. She was ashamed of the institution she had inherited in the way that is different from being ashamed of yourself, harder to locate, more resistant to resolution. She was afraid of how much she wanted to see Owen and how badly timed that wanting was. She was exhausted in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. But underneath all of that was something that arrived without drama. She was not going to look away from this. She found her father in his office the next morning. Leonard Voss, at 64, was a man who looked exactly like what he was, someone who had spent decades making large decisions and had stopped feeling the weight of most of them. He was compact and deliberate, with reading glasses he removed when he wanted to indicate that a conversation had his full focus. He removed them now. Hazel put the file on his desk and asked if he remembered a diagnostic supervisor named Owen Calloway who had worked in the fleet maintenance division 8 years ago. Leonard said that he had overseen a great many personnel decisions during that period and could not be expected to hold every name. She described the Northgate project, the component substitution, the 3 documented objections, the meeting. Owen being asked to sign off on equipment he had formally flagged, Owen leaving for the hospital, the termination that followed. Leonard was quiet for a moment. He said that the decision had been reviewed at the appropriate levels, that the timeline constraints had been real, that terminations under those circumstances followed a standard process. Hazel said his wife died. Their baby didn't survive. He lost everything he had in about 5 months. And the thing that set it in motion was you telling him that the project schedule mattered more than him being with his wife at the hospital. Leonard took his glasses off his forehead and set them on the desk. She kept going. She said she was not awake at 1 in the morning because of the decision itself. She understood that he had not been thinking about what came after, that he had been focused on what was directly in front of him. What she could not put down was that a man had been broken by something her father had set in motion, and her father had simply continued. 10 years of contracts and growth and groundbreaking ceremonies, and somewhere in Edmonton a man was working out of a small shop on Renfrew Street and raising his niece alone and keeping a photograph behind his driver's license, and none of it had ever registered as a data point on any line. Leonard looked at. Leonard said after a long pause that she loved this man. It was not a question. Hazel did not answer immediately. Her eyes filled. She did not look away. Leonard looked at his daughter the way parents sometimes stop looking at their children once they become adults. Really looked at her and saw something in her face he did not recognize from the composed, precise executive presence she had built. It was older than that, more foundational. She was standing on the other side of something from him, and she was not moving toward him. He put his glasses back on. He said nothing further. Hazel left the office and did not look back. Isla sensed it the way she sensed most things, through the quality of the air in the apartment rather than anything she could have described. Her dad had been quieter for 3 days. He had done everything he always did, made her dinner, helped with her reading log, asked about her day, but there was a stillness to him. She recognized from the times when the thing he was sitting with was too large to move around naturally. She waited until Thursday evening when he was on the couch, going through a stack of invoices. She climbed up beside him and sat with her legs folded under her and said, without preamble, that she didn't think Hazel had gone away for good. Owen set the invoices down. She said that Hazel made the apartment feel like there was a light on somewhere that wasn't on before. Like when you came home in the dark and the kitchen window was lit up and you knew someone was inside. She had not had that feeling in a long time, she said. Maybe since she was very small and she couldn't really remember it clearly, but she thought that was what it felt like. Owen put his arm around her. She leaned into his side. He sat there with the invoices on his lap and his daughter against his ribs, and something in his chest that was doing its best to hold its arrangement. That night after Isla was asleep, he called his oldest friend, a man named Curtis, who had been his closest friend since they had worked summer construction together at 19, and who had the particular quality of listening without turning it into a performance. Owen told him about Hazel. He told him about Leonard. He told him all of it in order, which he had not done aloud until now. When he finished, Curtis said, "What are you afraid of?" Owen thought about it for longer than the question should have needed. "I'm afraid Isla gets attached to something that turns out not to have room for her in it," he said. "I'm afraid I let her love someone, and then it comes apart, and she absorbs that the way she absorbs everything, quietly so I won't notice. I'm afraid of being the reason she learns early that the things you count on go away." Curtis said, "That fear is not going to leave just because the conditions get better." Owen said he knew. "She already loves her," Curtis said. "You heard it tonight." Owen said he had heard it. He sat at the kitchen table after the call, with the city quiet outside and a glass of water in front of him, and the photograph in his wallet that he was not looking at, but was aware of the way you are aware of a weight you have carried so long you have stopped calling it a weight. He thought about what it had cost to love something. He had paid that cost in full, with interest. He had been paying it for 8 years. The question was whether the cost of not trying again was something he was prepared to pay for 8 more. It was a Wednesday morning when Leonard Voss came to Renfrew Street. He did not call ahead. He came through the front entrance, alone, in a coat that cost more than Owen's truck, and asked the young woman at the front counter where he could find Owen Calloway. Owen was in the back, running diagnostics on a city utility van, when the door opened. He looked up and recognized Leonard immediately. The way you recognize someone you have thought about with considerable specificity for a long time. No surprise. Just a settling, like a calculation confirming what you already knew. Leonard stood in the doorway. He looked, for the first time in Owen's experience of him, like a man who was not certain what he had come to say. "I wanted to hear it from you," Leonard said. "Not from records. Not from Hazel. From you." Owen set down his scanner. He did not offer him a seat. He did not reach for any particular formality. He said, "All right." And then he told it simply, the way you tell something you have rehearsed in private many times, with no heat because the heat had cooled long ago into something denser. He described the Northgate meeting, the clearance form, the phone buzzing in his pocket, the man at the door of the boardroom, telling him the meeting had not concluded. He described the termination, the benefits cut at month's end, the weeks that followed. He did not embellish, he did not pause for effect. He gave it to Leonard the way a mechanic gives findings. Clean, documented, without commentary. Leonard stood and listened without interrupting. His face passed through several things that were not quite emotions, and not quite their absence. Something in the space between. "The thing I have never been able to set down," Owen said, "near the end of it, is not the job, it's not the money. It's that on the day I most needed to be somewhere, I was told that the schedule outweighed that, by someone who was never going to be in a position where a schedule outweighed his own family. That is the asymmetry I have been living inside for 8 years. Not rage, just a very clear, lasting understanding of what I was worth to that company when it came to it." Leonard looked at the photograph taped to the side of Owen's tool cabinet. It was Isla at the river valley, squinting into the sun, holding a stick she had found and clearly considered important. "Your daughter?" he asked. "My daughter," Owen said. He told Leonard about Isla, not as a bid for sympathy but because she was relevant. Any conversation about his life now was a conversation about hers. She would walk into any situation he walked into, and he had spent years making sure she only walked into rooms that would not teach her she was less than she was. Leonard said, "If I apologize to you, what does that mean?" Owen looked at him for a moment. "An apology doesn't change the date on a death certificate," he said. "It doesn't give back what Renata went through, or what Isla goes through, every time someone asks where her mother is, and she has to figure out how to answer. An apology is what you offer when you have run out of other options." Leonard was quiet. He looked at the floor, then back at Owen. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I came here because I needed to stand in the room where you actually work and understand what the distance between us really is, not what I assumed it was. I understand now that a man who loses what you lost because of a scheduling decision has been wronged in a way I have no right to name for him." He picked up his coat. He walked out the way he had come in. The room was very quiet. Owen stood at his workbench and looked at the photograph of Isla, squinting at the sun with her stick, and thought about the specific weight of a man who had stood somewhere he was not powerful and stayed long enough to hear the whole of it. Hazel did not wait to hear from Owen. She had made herself a commitment on the drive home from her father's office that she would not manage the situation by holding still and hoping it resolved itself toward her. That was not who she was, and it was not, she had come to understand, the kind of woman Owen would need her to be. She went to the company's legal team and asked them to conduct a thorough review of personnel terminations from the Northgate project period. She sat in those meetings herself, every one of them, and made clear what she was looking for. Cases where individuals had been let go under conditions that did not meet the company's own stated standards, and specifically cases involving loss of benefits at moments of documented personal crisis. There were 3 such cases. Owen's was the most significant. She put a reparations proposal to the board. She did not call it that in the presentation because language is strategic, but that is what it was. A fund for retroactive support to affected former employees and their families, paired with a formal acknowledgement entered into the company's institutional record that the practices of that period had not met acceptable standards. The board pushed back. She held the line. 2 sessions later, it passed. She was not under any illusion about what this did or did not undo. You cannot retroactively fund a pregnancy that did not make it through the winter. You cannot return a woman who died on a Thursday in June with the window open because her husband had left it open the night before and she had asked him to. You cannot give back 8 years. She did not pretend that writing checks and updating records was the same as justice. But it was the difference between an organization that looked at what it had done and said so, and one that simply waited for the people it had harmed to stop talking about it or move away or die. When it was done, she drove to Renfrew Street on a Friday afternoon and asked for Owen. He came out from the back of the shop in his work clothes, a little guarded, the way he had been guarded with her from the beginning, but present. Looking at her directly, she told him what she had done. She did not present it as something that would change things between them. She said she had done it because it was overdue, and because it was wrong, and because she could not continue building anything on a foundation that included that particular unacknowledged damage without it meaning something about her. He listened without speaking. "I'm not asking you to feel differently about my father," she said. "I'm not asking you to feel differently about any of it. I know I can't return what was taken. I know the shape of what you lost." She said, the thing she had been sitting with for days, the thing that felt truest once she stripped away everything else, that if the day came when he found he could not be with her, she would still spend the rest of her time at Voss Construction, trying to make sure his daughter grew up in a world built a little more honestly than the one that had been built at his expense. Something in his face changed, not dramatically. Not the way it happens in the version of the story you tell yourself when you want it to be simple. It was quieter than that. The change that happens when something that has been braced for a long time discovers it does not have to keep holding. He did not speak for a moment. Then he said, "I know you mean that." "I do," she said. He looked at her for a long time, and then, for the first time, she watched him not look away. The weeks that followed had a different quality, not resolved exactly, not the clean ending of a thing that had been difficult. More like a change in weather, the pressure lifting, the air becoming something you could actually breathe without thinking about it. The distance between them had not entirely closed, but it was no longer a wall. It was a space both of them moved through with care, with a mutual respect for what was still fragile. Isla had been told that Hazel was someone her dad trusted, and that they were still working out how to be in each other's lives, and that some things took time to become what they were going to be. Isla had received this with the philosophical steadiness of a child who had learned that adults are often slower than they need to be. She had not pushed, but she had started leaving her book on the end of the couch where Hazel usually sat, in case. Leonard, in the weeks since he had come to Renfrew Street, had been quieter than Hazel could remember him being. He had stopped coming to the office at the hours that telegraphed authority. He had started coming at the hours that suggested he was actually there to work. He had asked Hazel, over dinner one evening, about a project she was managing, and had asked about it in the way of someone who was genuinely interested in the answer rather than in the opportunity to weigh in on it. It was a small difference. It was not nothing. He had also, without telling Hazel until the documentation was already filed, liquidated a portion of a personal investment account and used the proceeds to establish a bursary fund for the children of tradespeople and maintenance workers employed by Voss Construction and its contractors. He had named it the Owen Calloway Fund. Hazel heard about it from the company's finance director, who had processed the paperwork and conveyed it with the tone of someone who had found it genuinely unexpected. She called her father. He said, simply, that it seemed like the right thing to do with what he had available to do something with. He had sent the full documentation to Owen directly, with a covering letter that was 3 sentences long. It said that he understood an apology was not the same as repair, that he was not offering an apology in its place, that he was offering what he had, and asking nothing in return. On a Saturday afternoon in late September, Hazel took Isla to Haralack Park, where the open field along the lake was wide enough for kite flying, and the concession stand near the west entrance had been operated by the same family for 30 years. The kite was shaped like a manta ray. Isla had selected it with great deliberateness, and it was aerodynamically unreliable in a way that became clear almost immediately. Hazel had retied the tail in the parking lot, and then again near the entrance, before they got it properly airborne. They had been there perhaps an hour when Owen arrived. He had come from a morning shift, still in his jacket, hands in his pockets, walking across the field with the particular unhurried intention of someone who has thought through exactly where he is going and does not need to announce it. Isla saw him first and ran. He caught her, lifted her once, set her back on her feet, and took the kite string she pressed into his hands with the authority of someone transferring a critical responsibility. Hazel watched him from a short distance away. The afternoon light was coming in at the low angle it comes in at in September in Edmonton, everything gold-edged and slightly long. He was laughing at something Isla had said. She could not hear the words from where she was standing. He walked over after a few minutes. Isla had resumed full command of the kite with the focused concentration it apparently required. "She told me that your father sent a letter," Owen said. "A few days ago." "I heard that," Hazel said. He looked out at the field for a moment. He said, "He put her name on something that will keep going." He didn't need to say anything else for her to understand what that meant. Owen Calloway, 8 years gone, named on a mechanism, not a monument, something that moved in the world. He stood there quietly. Isla called something across the field, and he raised one hand to let her know he had heard. "I don't know if I can fully forgive him," he said. "I want to be honest with you about that. Forgiveness is not something I can decide into existence because it would make things simpler. It has to arrive on its own when the conditions for it are actually real." "I know," Hazel said, "but I don't want to spend the rest of my life standing at the edge of the worst thing that happened to me," he said. "I know that edge. I know every stone of it. I have been standing there for 8 years, and I know it better than I know most places." He stopped. He looked at her, "And I think where I am right now is better than where I was, and I would like to keep moving toward better." Hazel felt something in her chest release that had been held for a long time. He reached over and took her hand. There was no speech in it. He simply placed his hand around hers in the open field, with the manta ray kite pulling against the wind, and Isla's voice bright in the afternoon, and held on. From across the field, Isla looked back. She turned away again immediately with the elaborate casualness of someone who has been waiting for something and is working very hard not to let on. But the smile broke through before she could stop it. It always did with Isla. She had not yet learned to keep the good things from showing on her face, and Owen had quietly decided he was in no hurry to teach her. Near the tree line at the northern edge of the park, a man in a dark coat stood alone with his hands in his coat pockets. He had not come closer. He had not called out. He simply stood there, looking across the field at the three of them the way a person looks at something. They have no standing to claim, but cannot bring themselves to stop watching. Owen saw him. He looked at Leonard Voss across the distance of the field, the way he looked at a machine he was trying to read, looking for the thing underneath the surface, the load-bearing truth of it. What he saw was a man standing somewhere he was not powerful, and staying. He gave one small, deliberate nod, not forgiveness, not an invitation, a recognition that the man across the grass had come, had stood in the room where Owen actually worked and had heard the whole of it, had put a name on something that would keep existing, that none of that was nothing, that from here, perhaps, there was somewhere further to go. Leonard nodded once in return. Then he turned and walked back through the trees. Isla called out that the kite had gone into a critical spin and required immediate intervention. Owen let go of Hazel's hand only long enough to jog out to his daughter, who was issuing technical instructions with considerable urgency, his voice carrying back across the field easily in the warm September air, and Hazel stood where she was for a moment with the sound of the two of them filling up the afternoon. There are apologies that cannot reach the places they are needed most. They cannot travel back through the years between the moment of harm and the moment of speaking. They cannot restore what was taken, or unmake what was lost, or return to life what has died. A fund named after a woman does not bring the woman back. A nod across a park does not erase 8 years. These things remain true and will go on remaining true, and there is no version of this kind of story where they stop being true. But there are also people who have been carrying something for so long that they have lost the memory of what it felt like not to carry it. And there are moments, not resolutions, not the clean closings of difficult chapters, but genuine, imperfect, forward-moving moments when the carrying pauses, when the weight is still there, in the photograph kept behind a driver's license, in a name spoken quietly at a bursary committee meeting, in the particular way a room can be entered in the morning with the window still open from the night before. But it is no longer the whole of the road. It is part of what you have walked through to get to where you are standing. That afternoon in the park, with a manta ray kite and a child's voice carrying across the field, and a woman whose hand had been taken without ceremony, but with complete and considered intention, Owen Calloway understood that he was still standing, that the floor was still there, that the future, which he had not trusted for a very long time, had not stopped requiring his presence. He reached for Hazel's hand again when he came back. She gave it to him without hesitation. Isla ran ahead toward the concession stand with the kite trailing behind her in the September light, and the afternoon continued the way afternoons do when the people in them have decided quietly, without making an announcement of it, to stay.